chosen one. God has intervened in your crisis. You can feel it, can't you? That heavy, suffocating silence just before the storm breaks. You've been standing on the edge, waiting for the ground to give way, waiting for the crisis you saw coming from a mile away to finally drag you under. But then nothing happened. Have you ever felt that invisible hand pull you back from the brink just in time? I want to hear your real story in the comments below, because this space is for honest conversations. Putting together these stories takes hours of dedication. So if this channel brings you peace, you can buy me a coffee using the Ko-Fi link in the description. Your volunteer support keeps this space alive. You know the exact kind of tired I'm talking about. It's not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep can fix. It's bone deep. It's a quiet, spiritual exhaustion that settles in your chest like lead and makes it hard to pull in a full breath. For weeks, maybe even months, you've been walking through a minefield blindfolded. You knew the crisis was coming. You could hear it breathing in the dark. It was the phone call you were terrified to answer, the envelope you couldn't bring yourself to open, the quiet, terrifying realization that the walls were finally closing in. And this time, there was no way out. You did everything right. Or, at least, you tried to. You planned. You prayed. You hustled. You kept your head down and tried to hold the fragile pieces of your life together with nothing but sheer willpower and masking tape. But the cracks kept spreading. It felt like you were standing on the shoreline, watching a massive tidal wave blot out the sun, knowing you simply didn't have the strength to run anymore. So you just stood there, bracing for impact, waiting for the devastation. There's a very specific, hollow kind of loneliness that comes when you are waiting for the end. You smile at the cashier at the grocery store. You ask your friends how their weekend was. You show up to work. You go through the mundane motions of a perfectly normal life, all while a silent, blaring alarm is screaming inside your head. Nobody else can hear it. You didn't want to burden anyone. You never do. You are always the one holding it together for everyone else. You are the rock, the fixer, the one who carries the heavy things, so others don't have to. But who catches the rock when it falls? The silence of that isolation is absolutely deafening. You lay awake at 3 a.m. The house is perfectly still, but your mind is a violent war zone. You play out every single worst-case scenario. You calculate the losses. You try to bargain with the universe, with God, with whatever might be listening in the dark. Just give me a break. Just this once. Please. But the darkness just stared back, cold, indifferent. Think about the physical toll it took on you. The tight knot in your stomach that never actually went away. The way your heart would violently race every time your phone buzzed, sending a sudden spike of adrenaline through your veins that left you dizzy and sick to your stomach. You lived in a state of perpetual bracing, shoulders pulled tight up by your ears, shallow breaths. You were operating in pure, unfiltered survival mode. You navigated a world that felt like it was made of thin glass, terrified that one wrong step, one wrong word, would shatter everything entirely. You watched other people living their lives, laughing at coffee shops, complaining about traffic, worrying about trivial, everyday things. You felt like an alien looking through a pane of glass. How could they be so calm? Didn't they know the sky was falling? But it wasn't their sky. It was yours. And the weight of that sky was crushing you into dust. You felt targeted, like you had a massive bullseye painted on your back. Why is it always me? Why is it that every time I take one step forward, I am violently shoved 3 steps back? It started to feel deeply personal, like the universe wasn't just random, but was actively conspiring against you. That's the heaviest part of the descent. It's not just the fear of the impending crisis. It's the creeping, toxic belief that maybe you actually deserve it. Maybe you aren't meant for peace. Maybe you are just wired for a struggle, destined to spend your entire life fighting fires you didn't even start. You try to find the silver lining. People love to tell you to stay positive. They love to say that God only gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. You hated that phrase. You didn't want to be a strong soldier anymore. You just wanted to be safe. You just wanted to put the heavy armor down. You were carrying a shield made of iron and a sword that was too heavy to lift, fighting an invisible enemy that seemed to know your every weakness. You began to mourn the life you thought you were going to have before the crisis even hit. You grieved the stability that was about to be violently ripped away. You brace your shoulders, tighten your jaw, and prepare to survive. Because that is what you do. You survive. But survival is not living. It's just delaying the end. You were so tired of fighting. You reached the absolute end of yourself. There were no more backup plans. No more favors to call in. No more hidden secret reserves of strength to tap into. Your tank was completely, devastatingly empty. You surrendered. It wasn't a peaceful, enlightened surrender. No, it was a messy, heartbreaking collapse on the bathroom floor. A silent, heaving cry into the steering wheel of your parked car. It was the moment you finally whispered to the empty air, "I can't do this anymore." You let go of the rope. You prepared to fall. You closed your eyes. You waited for the crash. You waited for the pain. You waited for the absolute destruction of everything you had fought so incredibly hard to build. You waited and waited. You kept your eyes shut tight, bracing for the cold rush of failure. The silence stretched out, thin and fragile. Every single second felt like an hour. You could hear your own heartbeat in your ears, a frantic, heavy drum beating against your ribs. Thump, thump, thump. You waited for the phone to ring with the final, devastating piece of bad news. You waited for the knock on the door. You waited for the inevitable collapse of the house of cards you had spent so much time desperately trying to protect from the wind. It's a strange, haunting place to be, hanging suspended in that terrible gap between surrender and destruction. In that endless pause, you started to review your mistakes. Every wrong turn, every miscalculation, every time you trusted the wrong person or ignored that quiet, nagging intuition in your gut. You laid it all out in your mind like a cruel high-definition highlight reel of your own shortcomings. You convinced yourself that this impending disaster was simply the natural consequence of your own flaws, that the universe was finally balancing the scales, and you were firmly on the losing end. The air in the room felt impossibly thick. You tried to swallow, but your throat was completely dry. You were paralyzed by the sheer momentum of the crisis that you knew was barreling toward you in the dark. There was no more running. There was no more hiding. There was nothing left to do but take the hit. You took one last, shaky breath in, and you waited, but the crash never came. You slowly opened your eyes. The room was exactly as you had left it. The dust motes were still floating gently in the slivers of pale light filtering through the blinds. The ground was still completely solid beneath your feet. The silence wasn't a heavy, suffocating pause before an explosion anymore. It was just silence, quiet, Still, unbroken, you checked your phone. Nothing. You looked out the window. The sky hadn't fallen. The crisis, that massive, terrifying monolith that had been blocking out your sun and stealing your oxygen, was just gone. How is that even possible? You had seen it coming. You had calculated the trajectory. You knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that it was going to destroy everything you loved. You had already grieved the loss. You had already made peace with the wreckage. But it didn't happen. Imagine standing in the middle of a dark, narrow train tunnel. You can hear the violent, screeching roar of a freight train hurtling toward you in the pitch black. You feel the ground shaking violently beneath your boots. You see the blinding white light of the headlamp cutting through the darkness, getting larger and brighter and hotter by the second. There is nowhere to run. The damp stone walls are too tight. The train is moving too fast. You brace for the impact. You close your eyes. You surrender to the end. And then, at the very last possible microsecond, right when the heat of the engine is burning your skin, the train hits a hidden switch on the tracks. It violently veers off to the side, rushing past you in a deafening, terrifying blur of heavy steel and rushing wind. It misses you completely. You are left standing in the dark, trembling, covered in cold sweat, completely untouched. That is exactly what just happened to you. The danger was real. The threat was absolute. You were not crazy, and you were not overreacting. The train was on the tracks, and it was heading straight for you. But something intervened. Some people call it sheer luck. Some call it a glitch in the matrix of our reality. Some call it a hand of God, reaching down in the 11th hour and physically moving the mountain that was about to crush you into dust. Whatever you want to call it, the result is the exact same. You were spared. It takes a very long time for the human brain to process that kind of emotional whiplash. Your nervous system is still flooded with adrenaline. Your hands are still shaking. You are still waiting for the other shoe to drop, because your exhausted mind simply cannot comprehend the fact that the danger has vanished into thin air. You might even feel a bizarre, sickening sense of guilt. Why was I spared when others weren't? Why did the storm break around my life and leave my house standing, while everything else was washed away? Those are questions without answers. But there's a profound, earth-shattering realization that begins to dawn on you in the quiet aftermath of a disaster that never arrived. You are not in control. For so long, you believed that everything rested entirely on your own two shoulders. You thought that if you just planned hard enough, worried long enough, and carried enough weight, you could control the chaotic outcome of your life. You thought your anxiety was a protective shield. But the stark truth is, you didn't save yourself from this crisis. Your worrying didn't stop the train. Your sleepless, agonizing nights didn't move the tracks. Something else did. There's a massive, unseen current flowing beneath the surface of our lives. A deep, quiet river of grace that we usually cannot see with our own eyes. We are so busy thrashing around on the surface, trying to swim against the violent rapids, desperately trying to build dams out of twigs and mud to control the flow of the roaring water. But sometimes, when we completely exhaust ourselves, when we finally stop kicking and let ourselves sink, that deep current catches us. It pulls us out of the riptide and deposits us gently, safely on the shore, not because we earned it, not because we were strong enough to fight the water, but simply because it wasn't our time to drown. You didn't earn this reprieve by being perfect. You didn't dodge the bullet because you were faster or smarter than everyone else. The bullet just didn't have your name on it. The danger was averted for you. Now, you have to figure out what to do with the silence. The alarm bells in your mind have finally stopped screaming, but the phantom ringing in your ears is still there. It is okay if you don't feel instantly happy. It is okay if you don't feel a sudden, euphoric burst of gratitude and light. Right now, all you probably feel is profoundly, incredibly hollow. You feel like a house that has just survived a Category 5 hurricane. The walls are still standing. The roof is miraculously intact. But every single picture frame inside has been violently rattled off the walls. Take a breath. A real one. Pull the air all the way down into your stomach. Let your tight, aching shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. You are safe. It feels strange to even think those words, doesn't it? You have lived in a state of mortal, grinding danger for so long that safety feels like a foreign country. You don't speak the language here. You don't know the customs. You keep looking over your shoulder, fully expecting the crisis to sneak up on you from behind with a knife. Let the quiet reality of the moment wash over you, slowly. Look at your hands. They are still here. Look out the window. The trees are still standing in the breeze. The sun is still casting long, quiet shadows across the pavement. The world did not end. You don't have to rush into fixing anything right now. You don't have to immediately start planning for the next inevitable disaster. Just sit in the quiet wreckage of the crisis that never happened. Give yourself permission to be entirely exhausted. You just fought a massive, invisible war in your mind for weeks on end. You carried a crushing, suffocating weight that nobody else could see or understand. You earned the right to just sit down and rest. There's a beautiful, quiet strength in simply allow yourself to be still. You don't need to rebuild the fortress today. You don't need to put the heavy iron armor back on. The threat is gone. The air is clear. You can finally put down the sword. Maybe you don't fully understand why you were protected. Maybe you never will. But you don't have to understand the mechanics of the miracle to appreciate the undeniable fact that you are still breathing. You were granted a pardon, a clean slate, a massive, beautiful blank space right where a dark tragedy was supposed to be permanently written. What you do with that space is entirely up to you. But for today, for this exact moment in time, you don't have to do anything at all. You just have to exist. You just have to breathe in the cool, clear air and know that the absolute worst-case scenario did not win today. You won, not by fighting, but by surviving long enough for the dark storm to break against an invisible mountain. You are here. You are whole, and you are safe. As the day fades and the quiet of the evening settles in, let that realization wrap around you like a heavy, warm blanket. You don't have to hold the sky up anymore. It's staying up all on its own. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and for bringing your authentic, heavy, real self to this space. You are never as alone as the darkness tries to convince you that you are. If this brought you a moment of peace, I'd be honored if you subscribed and stayed a while. Until next time, take a deep breath, leave the armor on the floor, and just rest.